Hello, today I'm going to show you how to make a knit cat hat. This is a very beginner-friendly pattern, and you can complete it within a couple hours depending on how fast you knit. We are only going to be using the knit stitch and the purl stitch for this project. What you will need is a ball of number 4 or worsted weight yarn, scissors, a knitting needle, and a stitch marker. The needles we will be using today is the US 11 8mm needle in the round as well as straight. Most of this hat will be done in the round. I am using a 16-inch long US 11 8mm bamboo needle. I just prefer bamboo over metal, but I always think you should just use whatever you have and whatever you are most comfortable with. The medium cast on is 60 stitches. A quick way to figure out how much of a tail you're going to need is take your thread and just hold it, and you're going to go around 10 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now we're going to take this length and we're just going to multiply it by 6. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I always do one more just because it's always a shame to get to the end and not have enough. So 7, which means we're going to start our slip-on here, and this is what we're going to be using to make all the cast-on stitches. To start our cast-ons, we need to make a slip stitch. How we're going to do that is we're going to have our tail on the right and our ball yarn on the left. I am going to take the yarn, the tail end, wrap it around the top of my thumb and go to the back. I am then going to pinch right here, and through this hole, grab the ball end yarn. You just can pull either end to make it tight. One more time. You wrap it around the thumb, pinch, and then pull through. Now we're going to start casting on. On the left is our tail, and on the right is our ball yarn. I'm going to take the yarn, wrap it around my thumb. I am then going to take the needle and go front to back through that loop over the thumb. I'm going to take the tail end and wrap it around back to front, so it is behind my thumb right here. I am then going to lift my thumb and bring it over the needle. One more time around the thumb, thread the needle through, front to back. Put the tail end of the yarn back to front, and then put your thumb over. For the medium size, we are going to do 60 cast on stitches. Now that we have 60 cast on stitches, we want to join in the round. What this means is that we are going to make this long string become one. How we are going to join in the round is we need to add one more cast on stitch. So for the medium size, you need 60. You will need 61 in order to join in the round. We are going to move that stitch we just made onto the right knitting needle. I'm just going to go back, front to back, and slip it onto the right needle. Now I'm going to use the left needle and go back to front on the stitch just in front of the stitch we slipped, and move that up and over that stitch we slipped on. What that does is that joins us in the round. Now we're going to be working with our yarn on the right side. The first 9 rows in this pattern are a rib stitch. Rib stitch alternates between knitting and purling. I usually start with knitting. Before we start, I am going to place a stitch marker on the needle so we know when we have finished and we're starting a new row. Starting with knitting, the knit stitch, I'm going to take our needle and go front to back. I am then going to take our thread that is attached to the ball and go around the back to front of the back needle. Then I am going to move this needle on the right back like that and go over. Now we're going to do a purl stitch. To do a purl stitch, we want to take our working yarn and move that to the front of the right needle. Then we're going to go back to front and wrap our yarn around the front needle and then slip it off. Now we do knit. You move that yarn to the back, front to back, wrap it around the back needle and slip it off. Purl, back to front, wrap it around the front, and then slip it off. We will do this for 9 rows. Now you can see I'm getting close to my first stitch marker. So I just did a knit stitch, and I'm going to show you really quick on how I can tell that. So a knit stitch, when you pull it back like this, you can see that it loops around and it makes that loop right there. You can see that loop right there. They should alternate like that. And you'll be able to see the opposite. So we have the loop there and there on the back, which means I need to do a purl. And then I stitch, a knit stitch. Now, because we started with knit stitch, we're supposed to end with a purl stitch, but as we can see, I ended with the wrong stitch, but that is okay. I'm just going to move the stitch marker to the right needle so we can keep going. If you do make a mistake and it's something simple like this, if you are a perfectionist and you would like to restart, you always can. I think I'm just going to keep going and I can make it a pattern if I really wanted to. I really doubt anyone's going to notice that I messed up a single stitch at the ribbing of a hat. Knitting is supposed to be for fun and to be fun, so if you do small mistakes like that, it's a learning experience. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. So as you keep going, you can start to tell the stitches apart much better. So I know that this is a purl stitch because that little loop is right there. That little loop is in the front right there. And I can tell that this is a knit stitch because instead of that little loop like we see over here, it goes diagonal and across. Now that we have done 9 rows of the ribbing stitch, we're going to continue to do the rest of the hat. And that will be 25 rows of the stockinette stitch. In the round, this is very easy because it is just the knit stitch. Normally, stockinette is alternating between stitch and purl to achieve this one effect. You can see that this side looks just like it's knit stitch, and on this side it looks like purl stitch. In the round, we don't have to switch between them to achieve this look, which makes it really easy. So let's just go over how to do the knit stitch. Again, we have the yarn on the back. We're going to take our right needle, go front to back, and just loop around the back needle. Front to back, loop around. And we will do this for 25 rows. Now that we have done all of our rows, we need to finish the hat. And how we do that is by a Kitchener stitch. What that is we're using the live edges of these two different sides here and sewing them together. What that'll do is that'll give us a nice invisible seam, basically. It kind of mimics the stitching pattern so that you can't really see. On this end, I didn't do it correctly, so you can kind of tell where the seam is. Our goal is to do it so that you can't tell, but to be honest, it gives it a little structure. It just kind of depends on what you like in your garment. So we have to prepare our needles first. So how we're going to do that is we're going to just take off our stitch marker because we don't need that anymore. And we're going to prepare to put these onto straight needles just because it's easier that way. We need to have the same amount of stitches on each side. So how I'm going to do this is I'm just going to count off by 3 to make sure I have the same amount on each side. Now that I have the stitches divided evenly, I am going to use this. It's basically kind of like a knitting safety pin. So I'm going to just slip all the stitches on one side onto this. Now that we have them all saved on the big safety pin, we're just going to transfer that to a straight needle. Now that we have finally transferred the knitting stitches onto straight needles, we need to cut the tail end that is connected to the ball of yarn. But we want to make sure that we have enough to travel this length. So I'd always just suggest doing a little bit longer than you think you need. So now that we have it disconnected. Alright, now we're going to need our knitting needle. And this is where we're going to start our Kitchener stitch. What we're going to do, our yarn is currently on the top. So what we're going to do is go into the bottom loop from front to back and just pull that through. Now I'm going to pull that off of the needle, and we're ready to start. I'm going to take our needle and thread it through the one on the bottom, front to back, as well as slip that off. You can see that we have our two stitches right next to each other then. What we're going to do is go on the top, loop it through, what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the bottom part of this stitch, go to the left and back under. Then we're going to slip those off. Now we're going to go through the loop of this stitch and then through that bottom one and just slip that off. Now we just kind of keep repeating the steps. We're going to go through the loop of this and slip that off. And keep going. Now that we have finished all of our Kitchener stitches, we are just going to finish off this hat. So I'm just putting my hand inside, and I am going to just go back through the top and into the center of the hat. There we go. Now I'm going to turn it inside out. There are two options you can do now. You can either weave in the ends, or you could use the leftover tail thread to make small darns so that your cat ears are more prominent. That will just depend on personal taste. I am just going to weave in the ends right now because I don't want to darn the edges, but that you totally can. To weave in edges, or to weave in the tails, what I do, I'm just going to put my hand in. Next, I am going to use my little needle, go through, and just wrap my thread around the stitches and pull it through. I am then going to go back And I just do this usually a couple times just to make sure that my thread won't loosen and I won't lose the tail. After you are happy with that, you can just cut off the excess. And now we need to weave in the tail at the bottom of the hat. I am just going to thread that tail and go around. Now that I am pretty confident that it is secure, I'm just going to cut off the excess. And now we have our finished hat. Looking back on this project, I know I made a lot of mistakes, personally, with knitting the ribbing as well as the Kitchener stitch. And that is okay. Sometimes we just have bad knitting days. And you can have bad knitting days too. I always like to think of projects as one step of getting closer to getting better. So I have made a lot of these hats, actually. So I know that the first one I made definitely wasn't as good as the one I just made, and that's okay. Knitting, you can always just keep learning, and make sure to remember to have fun.